cell phones out of respect for the Senate. Not for me. Secondly, before I get into this, if I don't do this, I'll be divorced. So happy birthday to my wonderful wife, Barbara.
Happy birthday to
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Barbara. Happy birthday to you.
You know, with public opinion of our congressional politicians now being at an all-time low, it is a real pleasure to be able to introduce today someone who crosses and has crossed party lines a dozen times to vote for the right thing. We have become so polarized in our politics in Washington that nothing's getting done. And I know that if Senator Zaffirini was in charge, stuff would be getting done. She's a senator for the 21st Senatorial District, the highest ranking woman in the Hispanic senator, re-elected for the 7th time in a landslide and carried all 17 counties. That's a feat no one else has ever accomplished. Please turn off or silence your cell phone. Let me do it, America. Y'all. Her legendary work ethic is reflected in a 100% performance, perfect attendance in the Texas Senate since 1987. She has sponsored and passed 725 bills and co-sponsored and passed another 384. She's also been married to Carlos for 47 years. Congratulations. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Senator Judith Zaffirini.
Thank you so much, Philip, for such a warm and generous introduction. I certainly appreciate the invitation to be here. And I love being with you all. Always love coming to Floresville, but I especially am proud of receiving another jar of peanut bread. That one looks fabulous. In fact, I was telling LaJuana, we went to the beach recently on a family vacation. On the way back, they had a sign at the restaurant that said homemade peanut bread. And I bought some. Didn't eat it. We all talk about Floresville. It is the best. Believe me, it is the best, and I truly enjoy it. But I'm delighted to be with you today. I was here at your chamber 2 years ago, and we talked about a lot of issues, including my connection to Floresville, which I love to share with you. Some of you are here for the first time when I come. So I love to say that I fell in love with Floresville way back when in the 1960s. When my husband was the chief of staff for our senator, Wayne Conley, and I was his part-time media aide. I wrote his speeches and his newsletters and his press releases, and I loved working for Wayne Conley. And then my husband went on to work for John Conley when he was in the governor's office. And one day, Wayne Conley asked him to represent him in Floresville at the Peanut Festival. That's when I discovered I loved it. And I was so impressed when we came another time with the flowers, and I understood why you named the city Floresville. It was just, being from Laredo, this was the most gorgeous city I've ever seen. Truly, all we had was bougainvillea. So I loved it, and I've always been proud of that connection. And of course, the connection with John Conley. And I remember at the time he was a Democrat. Then he became a Republican. And of course, Wayne Conley ran for lieutenant governor, and we supported him at the time. But we loved the Conley family. And it was through the Conley family that I gained increased interest into the needs of persons with intellectual disabilities. Because Wayne had a child with an intellectual disability. And they treated that child with the love and the interest and respect that you would treat your most brilliant, your most talented, your most gifted child. And he helped me understand, he and his wife helped me understand that children with intellectual disabilities have all the potential in the world, and that they should be treated holistically in terms of their personalities, because you see, I had grown up knowing some families that secretly had persons with problems like that. And there was one family, for example, that kept a child in the closet because he had an intellectual disability. For some families, there was shame. And I couldn't understand that, but it was Wayne Conley and his family who opened my eyes. And actually, since the age of 15, I have championed the needs of persons with intellectual disabilities. Those were some of the reasons that I ran for the Texas Senate, because he would work hard for the district. And I realized that we needed a senator who would work with all of the counties, not just the metropolitan areas, not just San Antonio in particular. The way our district used to be configured, the bulk of the vote and the people, but mostly the vote, disproportionately, Howard Berger knows this just as well as I do, the bulk of the vote was in 3 counties, Bexar County and Comal County and Guadalupe County. So whatever they decided ruled our district, because on election day, those 3 counties comprised 1/3 of the vote of our district. Can you imagine? And we were 20 counties. So when I ran, my pledge was to work with every county and to address issues large and small. It didn't matter how big, I would challenge them and assume their responsibility for them. It didn't matter how small. If somebody cared about that issue, so did I. And I remember I said at the time, your needs and interests are my needs and interests. Your priorities are my priorities. 27 years later, that's still exactly how I feel. And some of the best legislation that I have passed matters to a few people, only to a few people. But it's important to them, and that's why I'll do it. For example, there was one person who had been rejected by other people in terms of carrying a particular legislation. And that group that she represented got angry at me because they had been told that I had rejected the responsibility of working the bill. Wasn't true. Nobody had talked to me about it. But my staff checked on the internet and saw this negative item about me for having refused to carry this bill, and said, reach out to them, it's just not true. We did, we listened, and I carried the bill. Let me tell you what it was. Did you know that in Texas, if a woman gave birth to a baby who was still, and that is the appropriate terminology, a baby who was still, the woman will get a death certificate, but not a birth certificate. So you have evidence that your child died, but not that your child was born. And so I carried that bill. And it was so controversial I cannot explain it to you. Because immediately there were people who said, if you start counting the births of children who were born still, or they would use the word dead, or they would use the word stillborn, because they didn't understand the sensitivity of the issue to the parents, they said it will impact federal funding. It will impact population counts. Can you imagine? We're talking about the love of parents for their child who was born still. So I carried that bill, and I'm delighted to tell you we passed it. Now, how many people are impacted? Perhaps not many, but it was important to the people who care. So now, as we're getting together and talking about the legislative session that will begin in January of 2015, I implore you to talk to me about your issues, no matter how big, no matter how small. One of the first issues that we addressed as a senatorial district in 1986 was the issue of low-level radioactive waste material sites. Remember that issue? And it would have been in our district, had we not passed the bill that changed the rules and changed the requirements and changed the standards and put it elsewhere. But I will tell you this, we need to store waste. We need to store it, we need to transport it, we need to be responsible for it, but there are counties that look at those sites as economic development. And those are the efforts that I support. If the people of Wilson County were to come to me and say, we have the perfect site for an injection well, or we have the perfect site for a low-level radioactive waste material site, and we have lines of transportation that are safe, that do not go through aquifers, and we have the opportunity to store it safely with a buffer around it and without reducing private property values. If you really were united through your chamber, your city council, your commissioners court, the people were for it, we know it too. But if you oppose it, so do I. Because it's not for me to sit in Austin and say, I'm the senator and I'm going to decide what is right and what is wrong. The job of a state senator, the job of a state representative is to work with the people we represent and to represent truly your needs and your interests and your priorities. We have so many timely issues, and I will tell you, I've been delighted to represent your county since 1987 in the Texas Senate, except for 2 years. Remember when? All of a sudden, the senatorial district that I'm from, in Laredo, was redistricted outside the legislative process in a lawsuit, and I was sent to El Paso. My district went from Laredo to El Paso. New Orleans is closer to Laredo. Literally, I couldn't believe it. And for those 2 years, and I will tell you that when I come to the counties of the district and people ask me about the priorities we care about, education, economic development, the environment, etc., I could answer the questions and I could listen to the issues and understand them. But I remember when I went to one county in particular during those 2 years, and I opened the floor for questions, and the first question was, what is your position on the mountain lion? I was in shock. That's not an issue in Laredo. You see, the issues were so different from the issues that we address. Now, what we had in common, of course, was an interest in education and in economic development. But in another county that is no longer part of our district, they said, what is your position on economic development? I said, my position is your position. If you support particular economic development projects, then I will support you. I will either support you or I'll play a leadership role, depending on what you want me to do. Because I don't want to come in and give publicity. If you don't want my involvement, if you just want a letter of support, I'm happy to provide it. But if you want me to be a leader in the effort, I will. But the response to my response was, well, if you're for economic development, we're not for you. They didn't want economic development. This was a place where I would go in a small community, and to use it, we didn't have cell phones at the time. To use the phone, I had to go to the grocery store, back wall, and use their payphone. And they were concerned that I would help them bring a Dairy Queen in, and they didn't want a Dairy Queen. So you see, communities are different, and I understand that. They valued their way of life. They were a small community with a very nice tourist attraction there, and what they explained to me is they wanted tourists to come in and go. How could I fight that? If that's what they want, then I'm supported. But you see, in this part of the world, over here, it's different. Had my district remained the same from Laredo to El Paso, I probably would not have run for the election. Because those issues did not burn within my heart. They did not. I could not get excited about the mountain lion. And the first time I went to El Paso, after my speech at the college there, the university there, one of the teacher, in fact, the professor came to me and said, well, I changed my mind about you after I heard you speak. She said, I could support you. I will support you. And she said, but after I heard, when we woke up and realized that someone from Laredo was going to be our state senator, and then she said, actually, someone from Timbuktu was going to be our senator, we were upset. I said, well, when the people of Laredo woke up and realized that Timbuktu was going to be in our district, they were upset too. But you see, that's no way to win an election. It's not, because it shows the gap in districts. So the people of El Paso looked at Laredo as Timbuktu, but you know what? Vice versa. Whereas in our senatorial district, because the counties have been together for so long, we work together at the state level. And the wonderful thing about our 18-county senatorial district now is that it represents really the state of Texas. The diversity that we have in our district, to a large extent, represents what's good for the state of Texas. We have metropolitan, and we have rural, we have German, we have Polish, we have Mexican, we have Italian communities. It's just a wonderful microcosm of the state of Texas. It truly is. And the fact of the matter is that sometimes we have competing interests. For example, when you deal with water, when you deal with transportation, we have to work together to resolve those issues. Now with the Eagle Ford Shale, we see so many opportunities. And I remember the words of John Convey when he said, challenges were presented to us, opportunities were entrusted to us. The Eagle Ford Shale offers as many challenges as it does opportunities. And earlier we were talking about the increasing gap between the very wealthy and the very poor. And we have to ensure that as we recognize the challenges of the Eagle Ford Shale and the benefits and the challenges and the opportunities for the nearby counties such as yours, not being in a part of the shale, but certainly being close to it, how you can benefit but ensure that we remain sustainable. And I truly believe that the number one key to achieving sustainability as a community is through education. I truly believe that. Through education, starting with early childhood education and pursuing higher education. Because too many times when we talk about education, people talk simply about 1st through 12th grade. That's not enough. It's just not enough anymore. And we have to ensure that the children of this community have access to early childhood education. But we also have to ensure that those who are of the appropriate age, with the appropriate interests, with the appropriate qualifications, can pursue a higher education. I'm very concerned about the Alamo College Floresville Center and what has happened there. Now, I was first contacted by the Wilson County reporter who wrote me a letter and said they had closed it. We reached out to Alamo College and were told that it's not been closed, that it's still being worked out. So I was asked to bring together a meeting of people to talk about it. And then I found out that there's already a group of people who are addressing this very issue. I will play any role that the people of this community want me to play. If you want me to simply monitor, I'll monitor. My preference is to play a leadership role for you. That's what I would like to do. I would do it, but I don't want to butt in. So this is something that is wanted for me to do. My staff and I, today I have Rolando Gallegos. Rolando, will you stand so everybody will see you? Rolando Gallegos is traveling with me. We will be prepared to work with you to call meetings together as we have for many, many issues and to try to work this out. We have to ensure, for example, that your high school students have access, more access to dual credit courses. Did you know that in Laredo today, a high school senior who participates in our university program can get the high school diploma on the very same day that he or she is already a university junior? A junior through concurrent enrollment. Now, what a benefit. What a benefit in terms of education, but also in terms of savings. Everybody talks about the cost of higher education. The best way to save money is to graduate early, because it's the room, it's the board, it's all of the related expenses that drive up the cost of higher education. So what I'm hoping is that we have concurrent enrollment, that we have more dual credit hours, and that at the same time as we talk about pursuing higher education opportunities for you, that we also adapt specifically to the Eagle Ford Shale. Now, I will tell you, I don't get easily offended. But I got offended one time when we were at a meeting near Laredo, not in Laredo, but nearby. And we were dealing with people from outside the county. And they were saying, we need welders and truck drivers and all of these technicians, you know, concrete experts, et cetera. And I said, sure. And we can work through that. We can work through that through our high schools. We can work for that, to that end, through our community college. We have a very fine Laredo Community College. We can do all that. And I said, but we also want to support the future entrepreneurs, the future producers, the petroleum and chemical and other engineers who could be at the forefront. Doesn't that sound great to you? You know what the response was? Don't worry about that. We just want the welders and the truck drivers and the other workers. San Antonio will handle the petroleum engineers and the entrepreneurs. We have all that. My reaction was, I had a fit. You want to know something? We're getting a petroleum engineering degree at Laredo pretty soon. Because that's what we need to do. We want to provide the workforce, absolutely. But we want every person of the appropriate age to dream high. If someone wants to be a welder, that's great, and a truck driver, that's great. Those are honorable jobs, and I must say, very well-paid jobs. But let's also promote the engineers and the producers and the entrepreneurs. It is the whole scheme of things that we have to keep in mind. And the future, I believe, lies in education. Economic development is absolutely critical. And the economic multipliers of the Eagle Ford Shale are benefiting all the communities in ways we never expected. For example, you can expect the increased demand for housing, and of course, the increased demand for gasoline. But along with the increased demand for gasoline comes the wear and tear on our roads, and the expense of fixing and maintaining our roads, and we have to address that issue too. But the other day, I talked to a business owner, and I went in, and my watch is always slow. It's always been slow, and I went in and I said, I'd like to have my watch repaired. He said it would take 5 weeks. And I said, 5 weeks to repair a slow watch? I've had it since the 70s. Why would it, that's pretty slow. Well, it's business. That jeweler is so busy because of the Eagle Ford Shale. Who would have thought of that? Who would have thought of that? But see, as more people make more money, they buy more goods and services. So there's a great economic multiplier there and a great impact on ways that we never even thought of. People can afford more goods and better goods, more expensive goods, in many cases not necessarily better. But let's not just focus on that. Let's focus on the importance of educating all of the people we have, including those with intellectual disabilities, to the highest possible level. And I truly believe that the only way we can be responsible about the Eagle Ford Shale is to recognize the benefits and also recognize the challenges and work to do something about it. As I told you 2 years ago when I came to your chamber luncheon meeting, Wilson County alone cannot do it. You have to do it through a coalition of counties and cities, and working with the business community and everyone who cares about your community, first to identify the problems and second to solve them. I truly believe that. John Conley said it beautifully when we said so many years ago that we must strive to realize the fullest potential of our natural resources in Texas. But we must also strive with greater purpose to realize the highest potential of our human resources. Isn't that perfect? He said that in the 60s. And yet, it's perfect today, especially in light of the Eagle Ford Shale. I'm delighted to work with you and to work for you and to address the issues that you care about most. And I promise you that as we prepare for the legislative session that begins in January, that I will continue to be accessible to you so that together we can prepare a better future. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you and to share a few thoughts with you. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. I'm with PSAQ radio station here. I have a question for you. We also have interest in Laredo, but about this immigration problem with all the young kids and so forth, what is the education that's going to be afforded them in case they stay?
Well, that is largely a federal issue and a local issue. And I'm a state senator, so I really do not vote on issues such as that, educating the children, because it is your member in Congress who will work with the local leaders in addressing the issues of immigration. However, because the federal government has not fully addressed all the issues related to immigration, the state has stepped in. But when you have children who are here, then truly government officials typically believe that they should be fed and that they should be educated. That, however, is not a state government program, it is federal.
I see. What, one more question on, as far as the, like here in Floresville, for instance, the schools that are at capacity, the area that I cover in this area, what would be done to, I know you just addressed that, but partly, what would be done in that case? Would they educate them in some other fashion?
They are required to educate them, yes, under the law.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, sir.
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but there's a lot of speculation right now, and I'd like to know, are you planning on running again for the
Yes, I am,
state senator?
in 2016. And I will tell you, being in the Senate has been such a wonderful opportunity to make a difference. I take it very seriously. There are some people who run for one office and can't win, and run for another and can't win, run for another and can't win, and finally they give up. I won the first time I ran, when I wasn't given a chance. And I remember that there was one person in our senatorial district far from here who told me in Spanish, but I'll say it in English. He said, "You're running for the Texas Senate?" And I said, "Yes, why not?" And he said, "Well, everybody knows that women are supposed to stay home to clean house." This is when the election was in May and the runoff was in June and the general was in November. I said, "Yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm doing. I dusted off in May, swept up in June, I'm going to mop up in November." I ran and I won, and then basically I've been reelected 2-1 in every election. In every election, I've been reelected by at least 2-1. But it's because of addressing the issues. It's because of addressing the issues and working with even people that I know despise me, with people who might even celebrate if I drop dead. But if they have an issue, I'm going to work with them. I really am, because it's what's good for our district and it's what's good for our state of Texas. Now, Dr. Ray Keck, who's president of Texas A&M International, loves to talk about the number of mayors and the number of state reps and the number of congressmen. As your state senator, I have worked with 7 state representatives and 5 members of Congress who have represented you at that same time. And you see, I don't have an ambition for public office. I decided to run for the state senate, largely because I saw when I worked for Wayne Conley what you could do. I didn't want to do what Wayne Conley did. I wanted to do more than Wayne Conley. I really did. I wanted to pass the legislation people cared about. I wanted to block the legislation that people hated. But I wanted to work directly with the people of our district. And really, that's why I've been reelected, because that is my job. And I see the opportunity to do so much, specifically in areas such as early childhood education and higher education. And the banner I carry the highest is the banner for the needs of persons with intellectual, emotional, and physical disabilities. And there is no one in the legislature who carries that banner with the same passion. It's not personal. It's not personal. It's something that I understand. And I understand it, and I recognize that every Texan should have the opportunity to develop to his or her fullest potential. So that's why I'm running for re-election. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I know he hit on immigration a little bit. I want to take it from another direction. A lot of states, including Maryland and Iowa, have already, through state legislation, said no way. We're not going to house the immigrants that the federal government's going to place. Also here in Texas recently, they were talking about other than Mexican immigrants that are crossing the border. I know one rancher in South Texas found a English to, I think, Urabib dictionary, which is a Pakistani language. So there's a lot of people other than Mexican immigrants that are crossing our borders right now because of our leniency. How is the Texas State Senate going to address that?
Well, you have to understand the pyramid of laws. The state might have a law that the city or county contradicts in a law. The state law prevails. The city and the county might feel good about passing a law that is contradictory, but it is the state law that prevails. And the same thing is true of state laws. If we carry something and pass a bill, pass a law, create a law that is counter to the federal law, it is the federal law that prevails.
But even the federal law prohibits the immigration we're seeing now. They're just not enforcing it.
Well, that is true. But the state does not have the resources to do what the state should do. And actually, the state has spent an incredible amount of money on immigration when that is not our primary responsibility. And in fact, the cities and the counties are doing it too. But it is a responsibility of the federal government. I'll give you a personal example. I was telling Rolando, my staff member, on the way over, one day we had come over, we were in the McMullen County area, and my staff member and I suddenly felt this horrendous crash, and our airbags went off, and we didn't know what had happened. A deer had run into us, and we couldn't see. The airbags were deployed, and they weren't deflated. So we're surrounded on 3 sides by these huge airbags, can't move, can't get out, we don't know what to do. Of course, you have the alert system in your car. It didn't work because we were in an area where it didn't connect. So I finally got out under the airbag on the passenger side. I got out under the airbag and tried to use the cell phone and couldn't. And finally, walking around, we got a signal, and I called somebody in a nearby city, and we called 911. They answered in a nearby county. And I said, well, we need help. And he said, sorry, all of our law enforcement are out chasing fugitives. I said, fugitives? Was there a bank robbery or what? And they said, no, Mexican fugitives. So the 9/11 law enforcement responders could not help us, taxpayers, Texas, in an accident, in a dangerous situation, because my staff member just stopped. He didn't know what had happened. So there we were in the middle of the highway, or on one lane of the highway, and he couldn't help us because they were out chasing undocumented persons. And that's not right. It's not the best resource. It's not the best use of your resources at the city or the county level. It's also not the best use of the state resources, but we are doing it because the federal government has not. It is a federal responsibility, and the federal government should address it. They really should. Has the state stepped in? Necessarily, yes. Should it? You tell me, where should your taxpayers' funds go? They should be used for your level. We don't have enough money to fund education the way it should be. We don't have enough money for economic development, for human resources, for social services the way that we should, but we're spending money for the federal government's responsibility. That's not right. And my attitude, get up and do it. That's what they should do. Yes, sir.
Moving away from immigration, I did hear this morning on NPR that some folks, including they cited the Club for Growth, are advocating doing away with the federal highway trust fund. And I'm wondering, with our growth and so forth, how important are those federal dollars to combine with state dollars in?
Exceedingly important. They are exceedingly important, and that would be a real blow to Texas. It definitely would be a real blow. But you see, sometimes when the federal government wants to cut, they'll talk about doing away with a trust fund like that, and they'll say, we'll leave it to the states to address their own transportation needs. But people don't travel only within Texas. It's an interstate system. It is a national system, and that's why you have to combine local and state and federal money to ensure that we have a nationwide adequate system of transportation. By the same token, state funding has been cut over the years. One of the most difficult problems I had was back in 2003, when I believe it was 2003, when we had a $10 billion shortfall. And I was the single negotiator for the Senate, working with the House of Representatives to craft the final version of the budget. And I thought, where am I going to find this money? And I had 5 sleepless nights, and I cut that money from Health and Human Services. It broke my heart to do it, but you know what? I did, because we didn't have the money. And when you don't have the money, you can't spend it. But I worked with the advocates and with the agency representatives and with parents and with stakeholders and with people who knew better than I what the needs were. And I cut in the least painful places. And I also cut in places where I knew we could restore the money when we had the money. And in 2005, we came back and restored it, because some of the decisions we had to make were so painful, but we did it. If you don't have the money, you can't spend it. But in Texas, I believe that we should prioritize not only education and economic development, but also specific needs such as transportation and water. We cannot grow as a state, we cannot thrive as a state without addressing our transportation and water issues. I mean, how do you live without water? You have to, you absolutely have to, but it takes money. And yet there are people who come in and say we have to slash and burn. What do you slash? Show me where you would have put the funds. There are places, but it's painful, and you have to do it sometimes. But we have to ensure that our transportation fund is adequately funded. We've had a horrible issue when the Texas Agency on Transportation decided to turn some of our paved roads to gravel. Remember that? And we organized and we fought it. I believe in communication, truly. And we called a meeting in Cotula, Texas, and invited all the transportation agency representatives and the people of the region to come out and speak and be heard. And we reversed it. They had already gravelled a road in Livo County, and they had gravelled something in Dimmitt County, but they stopped. So we turned that around. And after that, the Lieutenant Governor organized the Transportation Funding Committee, and I'm delighted that I got on it. I begged him to put me on it, and so we're on it, to ensure that we prioritize our funding. Doc Briscoe would be rolling over in his grave to know that we were threatening the farm to market road. I mean, that is horrific. And gravelly? Give me a break. Since when do we go backward instead of forward? Think of the impact on agriculture. But you see, that's where the big division comes. Philip was talking about my being bipartisan, and I'm very proud to address issues on a bipartisan basis. I'm a Democrat, but I work with Republicans, and it's the only way that we're going to work things out, is on a bipartisan basis, truly. But the fact of the matter is that when it comes to those issues, you have to reach out and listen to the people, because many times it is the people, not the city, state, or county officials who can best articulate the need. It is the people who work in the real world every day, not simply in an elected official's office the way some of us do, but who are confronting these problems every day. Mayor, would you agree with me? Absolutely. It's the people who deal with these issues. It is their life or death in many cases. They're the ones who can articulate the issues best. And I'm delighted to listen, and I'm delighted to discuss the issues with you and to try to help you resolve. I'm not afraid of issues. I'll tell you where I stand, and I'll tell you how I'll vote, and I will never hide a vote. And that is why I believe that I've been reelected. I remember way back when in 1986 when somebody called me from New Braunfels, Texas, and she said, "We have just heard a vicious rumor about you." And I said, "What is the vicious rumor?" I could only wait to hear it. There are so many out there. And so she said, "We have heard a vicious rumor that you are pro-life." I said, "It's not a rumor. I am pro-life." She said, "You're a Democrat." I said, "I'm a pro-life Democrat." And she couldn't believe it. She said, "We can't support you." And this is a group that had promised me that they would organize for me in Northeast Bear County, open a headquarters for me, fund it for me, find the volunteers to staff it, and give me a $25,000 contribution. And when they found out that I was pro-life, and I admitted it, they said, "We can't do that." I said, "I'm sorry." And then they called back. And it was a group that was together. And they called back and they said, "We really want to support you. We can support you in spite of your being pro-life if you will agree to walk anytime that there's a vote." Walk means literally, you walk out of the room. You do not vote. And I said, "I cannot make that commitment." I said, "I am not a Bowman the Mountain pro-lifer. You know, that's not my number one issue. I am pro-life. I carry the banner I told you about earlier." And I said, "But when the vote comes up, I'm going to vote pro-life." And I will. And so they did not support me. But you know what? That's when I made up my mind that I would never, ever walk a vote. And that is why Philip said I've passed more than 50,000 consecutive votes. I have never missed a single vote in the Texas Senate since January of 1987. Because you may not agree with me, but please always know that I will listen, that I will be honest with you, that I will make the best decision I can based on the best needs and interests of the people I represent, balanced with the state of Texas. And I will never, ever walk a vote or lie about it. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you.
I'd like to ask a question about what you just addressed, and thank you for being pro-life and admitting it.
Committing.
Yes, well, because it's not politics, it's life. And but my question is about water and roads. When there's funding available, my understanding of funding comes from when they buy gas, they pay a tax for the gas. Well, we around here are experiencing a lot of gas going out because of all the oil field trucks and the increase in that. Why is that money not coming back into our roads around here? Highway 97 between out of Wilson County towards Pleasanton is falling completely apart.
Well, some of it is coming back. Some of it is coming back, but not enough. At last session in 2013, I sponsored a bill that required the money that was collected in taxes and gasoline taxes from a county to go back to that county, a certain percentage of it to go back to that county to repair and to maintain the roads.
What is that percentage?
I don't remember the exact percentage, that was in 2013, we can find that out for you. Yolanda, will you get that, if you'll get in your name and address? It was a bill that I carried in 2013, so that was, more than a year ago. But I got a subcommittee hearing on it, couldn't even get a full committee hearing. Could not get a full committee hearing, much less the votes. Couldn't do it. But I believe the reason that the state of Texas is doing as well as it is right now is because of our shales, and more specifically, the Eagle Ford Shale. And it's a great benefit to the communities, it's a great benefit to our state, but the problems that are encountered locally should be addressed by the same money that is generated here. And so I believe very, very strongly, and we plan to reintroduce that bill, or a similar version of that bill, to ask that some of the money generated in the county be returned to that county for problems such as this.
So it won't be done, those type of things won't be addressed until a bill goes forward?
That's right.
That's really sad.
That's the only way it can do. And, well, the agencies could appropriate money for it from their funds, but remember, their funds were slashed because there are people who want to slash and burn. So a lot of people talk about government spending and government spending being too high. But then when government spending is cut, Texans have to live with the repercussions and the consequences of that. So you can't reduce spending with also reducing services. It's very complicated.
Does it require the signatures for the vote, or does it require the appropriate people?
I'm sorry?
Or both? I'm sorry, be able to get the bill, to get it passed?
Well,
Is
to
it the
get a bill
signatures?
passed, first the committee chair has to set the hearing. That's step number one. And in this case, the committee chair, who was Tommy Williams, referred the bill to a subcommittee chaired by Senator Glenn Hager, who, by the way, is a candidate for office now. He's running for comptroller. So he heard the bill in subcommittee, but did not report it favorably to the full committee. So without that report in the subcommittee, it could not be considered by the full committee. Without it being reported by the full committee, it could not be considered by the Senate. However, the idea was borrowed in the transportation bill that was later passed by Robert Nichols. So he took the idea that I had for the shale funds and used it in the statewide bill to some extent. So they did borrow that idea. So some of the money will come back, and we did get $450 million for improvements. It's not enough. It's not enough. And then somewhere else, we got $225 million in grants for the counties. That's not enough. We needed absolute rock bottom minimum, $2 billion. $2 billion, preferably 4 or 5 statewide. That's not enough. It's just not. But you can't cut the budget, you can't slash spending, and also provide all these services. They are mutually exclusive. You can't do it.
I know that a lot of this is federal dollars, but what about our rainy day fund that they always talk about? We have all that money set aside for the rainy day. Well, I mean, if we let our roads go to, we hit the rainy day.
We did use some rainy day funds, for example, to restore the cuts to education and to restore other cuts we did use, but I cannot tell you how many members of the legislature absolutely oppose spending $1 from the rainy day fund. The rainy day fund was created for rainy days. And some of us said, we don't have a rainy day, it's stormy. What are you talking about? We've got a storm out there, not just another rainy day. But there are so many members who absolutely abhor the idea of spending that money. They want to keep it there and grow the fund and not spend it. I believe that we should keep a minimum in there, perhaps $2 billion, maybe $4 or $5 billion. But above that, we should spend it to address the problems such as transportation, water, education, the priorities of the people of Texas. It's controversial. I'm telling you where I stand. I vote aye.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so much.
Let's go to work.